Who is your favourite character from a horror film?
From a horror film?
Yes.
Oh, The Grudge.
And why?
I think she's just really scary and freaky.
What makes her so scary and freaky?
She doesn't talk. She's like the character, she just does a weird ghostly thing, she just doesn't talk and it's just always there.
Yeah.
Appearing everywhere and she's so silent and like silent.
Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as having to figure out who the murderer is, etc.?
Not really, because I don't mind knowing who the murderer is. I just like knowing like what happens with any of the events.
Okay. Do you think the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
Yes, because sometimes like we have like the scares, like it's matched in with the music as just as it heightens.
Do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune?
Ooh, distinctive tune. Ooh. Can't think of any really.
They can't have been that distinctive then. Do you like suspense or an obvious plot?
I prefer suspense.
Why?
Because like I like just having to think, waiting for something to happen. Because if I know the plot's happening, then I'll probably just get bored of the film, thinking I've seen this 1,000 times. I don't really want to see it again.
Who is your favourite character from a horror film, and why?
If American Psycho's a horror film, then it's Patrick Bateman because it's Christian Bale and I love him. I don't really like horror films, so I don't really watch them.
Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as trying to figure out who the murderer is, etc.?
Yeah. I think that makes it more exciting and it keeps the audience engaged as they want to find out what's going to happen.
Do you think that the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
No, not particularly, because I can never really remember soundtracks. Oh yeah, I love soundtracks, so if it's good, then I'll probably buy it anyway.
And do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune?
Jaws. I don't know. Maybe.
That does kind of count.
No.
Do you like suspense or an obvious plot, and why?
Suspense, because if it's obvious, then what's the point in watching it? Like, you want to be like, oh, what's going to happen? And then you like jump out your seat and you're like, ah! Yeah, same.
Who is your favourite character from a horror film, and why?
My favourite character from a horror film is probably Jigsaw from the Saw films.
Nice. Why is that?
Probably because he's just quite for once, he's quite a developed character and there's a lot of background to sort of what he is.
Okay. Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as having to figure out who the murderer is and stuff?
Yeah, I think that's kind of crucial to any kind of horror film.
Yeah. Do you think the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
Yes, definitely. Because music usually makes you jump at things that aren't even that scary, and then 10 seconds later you get shit scared by a coat.
And do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune?
The Exorcists, that's Tubular Bells, the song soundtrack to that.
Nice. Do you like suspense or an obvious plot, and why?
I think suspense, for me, is probably the most important. Because it kind of makes or breaks the film itself. Sometimes suspense is used too loosely and it ruins the whole film. Yeah.
Who is your favourite character from a horror film?
I think Dracula.
Yeah.
And I think because there is a certain undertone of sexuality and sexual violence attached with it. Not that I'm particularly attracted to that, but it is quite interesting.
Okay. Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as having to figure out who the murderer is, etc.?
No, not particularly.
Do you think the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
Oh yes, I mean that increases the tension and it can be absolutely vital for the film.
And do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune?
Well, yes. I saw many years ago a film which used Michael Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and it was about a girl that was possessed of an evil spirit, and it was called and I cannot remember the name of it.
And then, do you like suspense or an obvious plot, and why?
I like traditional horror film. That's why I say Dracula and Frankenstein and things like that, because I know the story and I feel much more comfortable with that. And if there's occasionally something a little bit different with it, in other words, a twist, I don't mind that. But I can't get into a horror film which, you know, I've never known what it was about or anything. I just don't do that.
Okay. Who is your favourite character from a horror film and why?
Oh my god. From The Haunting, maybe. That blonde guy gets his head cut off by the lion. I'll go with that one.
What, he's your favourite
He's
character?
my favourite character.
Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as having to figure out who the murderer is, etc.?
Yeah, I prefer thrillers.
Okay. Do you think the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
Yes, as long as it's not too like in your face screamy.
Do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune?
I can't think of one. Maybe, does Saw have one, maybe?
I
Or
haven't
just
seen
lots of
Saw.
screaming?
Probably. Do you like suspense or an obvious plot, and why?
I like suspense, because it leaves me guessing, and I like to feel intelligent at the end if I guess it. An obvious plot?
Like, you kind of know what's going to happen. It's
Oh no,
pretty
I
obvious.
don't like it if it's too obvious.
Because like with Final Destination, everyone knows everyone's going to die. and,
Oh
like...
yeah, no, I don't hate those films, yeah.
Who is your favourite character from a horror film and why?
My favourite character from a horror film is Jack Torrance from The Shining.
The main guy is usually the scariest.
Yeah, but from what do you mean? Like, I'm
Just
asking a specific character.
In general movies, horror movies.
Okay. Do you prefer a bit of mystery in a horror film, such as having to figure out who the murderer is, etc.?
Yes.
I agree.
Why?
Because it offers a more interesting narrative than just the usual horror tropes.
What is it?
Okay. Do you think the soundtrack in a horror film is important?
Very, because it increases in tension and suspense, and
Definitely.
gets the audience enticed into the movie.
Goblin's soundtrack to Dawn of the Dead is one of the most vital in film history.
Do you know any horror films with a distinctive soundtrack or theme tune that's
Jaws.
stuck in your head?
Dawn of the Dead. That was
And
That's
do you like suspense in a horror film or an obvious plot, and why?
Please only repeat the question.
suspense any day. Suspense any day.
Repeat the question, please.
Do you like suspense or an
Cheers.
obvious plot in a horror film, and why? So an obvious plot would be something like
Suspense,
Final
'cause it
Destination or
creates
something.
mystery.
Okay.